Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by the best-selling online course, Become a Super Learner. If you're like most people, you probably have a long list of books you want to read, languages you wish you knew, and skills you wish you had the time to learn. This course teaches you how to learn anything and everything faster and more effectively by teaching you not only speed reading, but also an entirely new framework for understanding, creating, and storing memories. To get an 80% off coupon and join over 25,000 satisfied students, visit jle.vi/learn. That's http://jle.vi/learn. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you guys today. As I'm sure most of you know, my journey towards becoming your humble host actually started when I built an online course translating the materials of two of my mentors and tutors on the topics of memory and speed reading, accelerated learning, and all that good stuff. Now, that course, over the course of the last couple of years, grew into the 50,000 student army that it is today, as well as a best-selling book. And long story short, it's become the platform that's allowed me to do this podcast for you guys. Now, in our very, very first episode, you may remember that we went into it a bit with my co-instructors, Dr. Lev and Professor Anna Goldentouch, and we explored a lot about what accelerated learning and memory techniques really look like. After that episode, which, by the way, is one of our most popular of all time, there were a lot of questions left over, and so I recently took the opportunity to have Dr. Lev and Professor Anna back on the show to answer your questions, particularly on some exciting new topics that we've never discussed before. If you're not an existing student of the course and you haven't heard the previous episode, some of the concepts might not be that familiar to you, though we do try to explain when we use jargon and so on. Either way, no prior knowledge is assumed in this podcast, though if you are a student and have heard that first episode I discussed, this episode will answer a lot of the questions that might have been burning or might have been left over. In it, we talk a lot about language learning, but we really focus on applying super learning techniques to teaching children, and then we go into hacking motivation, real-life examples of how to learn, and really a lot more. So whether or not you have kids, this episode will be an interesting one for you, though I will say that we all have children in our lives, whether they're our own, our nieces and nephews, our cousins, or even our siblings. And I know we all want to make sure that we're grooming the next generation to succeed and continue their thirst for learning. Let us know what you think of this episode, either in the comments or on Twitter. It is a little bit different than our typical interview style episode, but I think you guys are going to love it nonetheless. And so with that, let me present to you my co-authors, Dr. Lev and Professor Anna Goldentouch. So, Dr. Lev, Professor Anna, welcome back. It's really good to see you guys. I rarely get to see you guys anymore because you're so busy with kids and work and writing books. How have you guys been?
We have been great. We are working on several new projects and we will be revealing them soon. I hope you will like them.
That's exciting. So can I talk a little bit about our new project?
Yes, of course.
Awesome. So we've been working all day, which is the occasion why I got to see you guys. We've been working on a really interesting topic, which is how can you raise your children to be super learners? As we've said in the course, some of this stuff, most of this stuff that we're teaching in our course really only works once you have foundational knowledge. You already read very well. You already have a lot of life experience. But it's been interesting to explore how would this look if we were trying to set children up for learning and success. Do you guys want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, I think that everybody is a little bit of a child and it will not hurt anyone to go through this course.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. Some of the points that we covered, I think, transition also into Super Learner and how we can improve our flagship course. For example, asking the right questions, learning how to ask questions, I think is a really important skill.
Yeah, that we can learn from the children.
Exactly. And looking at the world in the way that they do, as everything is new. And we talked a lot about assumptions as well, which I think is interesting, questioning assumptions and stuff like that. So give us one other project you guys are working on. Tell us about that.
Well, we are working on some stuff that will help to learn languages, foreign languages.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Interesting. You guys know that that's a passion of mine. So tell me about that. Tell me about what are some of the make or break techniques that allow people to learn languages more effectively?
Well, the problem with learning languages is usually motivation. Very soon into learning languages, we just lose motivation. So as long as you can keep your motivation up, you will probably learn the language.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that. And I think part of it is the first month you study a language, every hour you sit is a quantum leap. It's like, oh my gosh, now I can order in a restaurant. And then you sit another hour. Oh my gosh, now I know how to ask really important things. But then when you get to 100 hours, suddenly every time you sit, you're making very, very minor changes that are improving your grammar. So how do you hack that motivation?
Motivation is very easy to hack. You kind of imagine how you will use your new skills every time in a different situation, how you will fail without knowing, and how knowing it will help you.
So creating a little bit of pressure and urgency.
It's always about visualization, and the visualization should be very accurate for the specific stuff that you are learning. Like you go to a restaurant, you ordered your food, now the check arrived and the sum is wrong. How do you argue with the official?
Oh, wow. That's interesting because up until this point, you've been able to order and then all of a sudden, I never thought of that. Very interesting. What about learning grammar? Have you guys given any thought to that? Because that's where I struggle.
The interesting thing about polyglots is that these people just use synesthesia. They just see words and parts of words with color. So we developed a little model that helps us to build the skill. And when I see words, I usually see them in color now.
Oh, that's
this is something that you learn.
But you also,
something you're born with.
You have a lot of kind of synesthetic abilities.
I was not born with them.
Interesting. One of the things that I found so interesting about people who study grammar, and, I've had Benny Lewis on my podcast, is they don't study grammar. They practice it and they experience it, and eventually they allow the mind to intuitively figure it out by itself, which has made it so hard when you talk to some of the world's language learning experts and they say, don't study grammar, just start speaking. It makes it very hard to try and build a super learning hack around it.
It's actually, we talk about it in our course for the kids. It's going from a role to examples and from example to role. This is something that most people do not know how to use. And if you have enough examples and your skill is good enough, you will generate the rule automatically. You do not have to learn the rule. But if you learn the rule, it will not always help you to generate the examples.
Oh, that's a really, really good point. So it's a matter of looking at macro. It's a matter of structuring the knowledge in the right order.
Exactly. All the knowledge that we use all the time is structured. When we read a book, we do not just read a very, very, very long story. We read chapters, we read paragraphs, we read sentences, and each chapter, each paragraph brings a new idea. And the way that the information is structured is the best way for us to use it.
Bringing it back to the languages, though, now that I think of it, every time I meet, for example, a native Russian speaker, and I always tell them I struggle with the cases, and they go, remind me what the cases are again? They have no idea. They've just heard a million examples of how these cases are used, and they know the rules and they know how to apply the rules better than I do.
Actually, there is a different word in Russian. It's called падеж.
Падеж, exactly.
Unless you know this word, the word case doesn't
the thing, even when I tell them, I say like, у меня есть проблем в падеж, or на падеж, or с падежом.
Look,
right.
The way you talk, the pronunciation is not right.
Right.
So it sounds like, will you go out with me?
Well, the thing though is, and I want to touch on pronunciation as well because of the language learning course, but yeah, even if I tell them падежи, they're like, yeah, I don't really know what that is. I just speak and I know how to conjugate the word or how to, it's actually declensing the word, if I'm not mistaken, correctly. And they just know which case somehow they know which case to use.
It's the way the children learns language.
Exactly.
They're exposed to the language and they build it intuitively.
Exactly. And then
only in school they learn
a huge part of learning any language is immersion. At some point, you just need to be open to a huge amount of text or whatever it is, music, dancing, whatever it is, in that specific language. So unless you read like 1,000 pages of some text in some language, your language skills will not be that good.
Right. And that connects back, just drawing the point to a conclusion almost, connects back to letting the brain figure out the rule from the examples. Yes, it's a good idea, but you can sometimes help by learning the rules before you do that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's how most people have learned languages historically. So Anna mentioned in the course for kids, and she mentioned how kids learn. Tell me a little bit about the process you guys have really innovated. I mean, you guys have a background in learning, but then you had to learn how to be parents not so long ago. And at some point, as I could tell from our discussions today, you've spent a lot of time adapting these materials because you can't just throw them in a kid's lap. So tell me about that process of trial and error and figuring out. Well, we had some problems with our kids because every kid comes with his own set of challenges. And we tried to use our super learner skills, and this just didn't work. So we went to professionals, and they used a totally different skill set. So we needed to adapt. Interesting. What was one of the big successes, Anna, when you realized, like, oh my gosh, we figured out how to adapt something so sophisticated that, even a child can use it? When I started to talk with my kids about finance and economics, and they started to explain it to me back, that was a good one. Oh, yeah? That was a moment of victory, huh? Yes. Wow. That's so cool. So I know we spent the entire day really going over this, and I'm finally starting to understand how the method works and how you guys have adapted it. But walk through a little bit in general, like what are some of the basic principles when you want to teach your kids how to be more effective learners? Well, they need to have fun. This is basics with kids. Like, we need to understand what we are doing. Kids need to have fun. So as long as they can play while they're learning, they will learn. Yeah. It's interesting because we do talk in the main Super Learner course, we talk about Malcolm Knowles, and he figured out the 6 things that adults need that children don't. But we never go back and do the math the opposite way, which is to say, adults need pressing need. They need applicability of the knowledge and they need to know. But kids need to know that this knowledge is fun and engaging. And at least in my experience, it's not until the age of 12 or so when you start looking up at the teacher and going, when am I going to use this? Children just go, is this fun or is this not fun? Am I enjoying watching this cartoon or am I not? And so it's much more important than any of the pressing need. And of course, it goes without saying, the other Malcolm Knowles' big one is connected to prior knowledge, and kids don't have much prior knowledge. They have a lot of prior knowledge. They play all the time. They play different games. But not, say, to multiplication tables. I mean, how are they going to connect, for example? By fingers. There are rules of how to multiply by fingers. So if you play enough time with kids, they will multiply. With my second son, it was much easier. He just wanted to impress everybody. So we started to multiply. Then we went to Googleplex. And then we started to reduce the numbers back. Oh, interesting. So a lot of it and a lot of what we discussed today is about knowing how to structure conversations and structure play in an educational way? Or is it the other way around? Is it structuring play as educational, which I think many parents do, or is it structuring education as play? I think those two things are a little bit different. Every opportunity is a learning opportunity. So first you play and then you think how to use it. Interesting. Anything to add to that?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I really am a naggy parent. I nag all the time. And why do you think that? And why? So I engage my children to talk to me all the time. And then I just tell Lev at night, I were able to understand, were able to learn how to do it or how to say it. And I really enjoy that.
Anna is very modest. Actually, one of her first super skill sets was taking a child who was getting C minus C and bringing the child to A. And it worked every time, and it took less than 5 days. It was really amazing how she took a person from C to A in 5 days.
How?
7 rhymes. Well, I actually even have a blog post about it. The basic idea is just to build curiosity, to make the student enjoy what he's learning. And once the student enjoys what he's learning, the next step is build one small success upon another. No matter how small a success, celebrate it.
Interesting. It sounds so basic. I mean, this is stuff that doesn't just apply to children, it applies to human beings. And yet it sounds like a lot of schools and a lot of parents are not using this knowledge. Why do you guys think that is?
It's very hard to work with many kids. When you're a parent, you have like 100 things that you need to do. You need to clean, you need to get some money, you need to have fun yourself, you need to have sleep, you need to make food, you need to make a lot of things. And then there is a child. And if you have some time to be with this child, you will probably have some fun and argue about the chores, but you will not get to studying properly. When you get to studying, you ask, okay, what did they give you at school? Now at school they have a very similar problem. They have like 20, 30 or 40 kids for one teacher. And the kids are different. So the teacher cannot really teach every child in a way that is proper for this particular child.
Individualized, you mean?
Individualized.
It is easy to think that we can take our knowledge and give it to a child, just put it into his head. It's harder to take the learning in the speed of the child. So if the child needs to take it slower, then we need to go with him. And this is the ability to step out and think about the process and not just tell what I know about the subject.
Interesting.
It's very easy to try and recreate what we understand about things. Very hard to make the other person understand it.
Interesting. I mean, we're kind of bordering on this. I think one of the interesting things is that it takes a lot of creativity, right? On the educator's perspective, on the parent's perspective, but also on the child's perspective, right? It takes a lot of creativity to learn anything, really.
Children are creative. Don't break them.
Oh, no, certainly. Certainly they're very creative, but I think it's about harnessing the creativity in new ways, maybe.
Kids, and the adults too, we just get stuck in some things. We imagine something in a certain way and we cannot continue from it. So one of the main points in tactics is just getting your kid unstuck.
What does that look like?
Well, we're talking about something and then I'm saying something which doesn't sound funny to me. Like I said, Warren Buffett, and they started to talk about waffles and how they want to eat waffles.
Okay.
So it was very hard to unstuck them.
From that point.
Yes.
I have to ask, why are you talking to your kids about Warren Buffett?
Oh, they are very good in finances.
Really? That's an interesting thing because since I've been an adult, I've spoken with my parents a lot about what I think they did well, a little bit of what I think they didn't do as well. But one of the most powerful things I think they ever did is they had something called the 5-year rule. My dad calls it the 5-year rule. My mom calls it just never talking down to a child. But my dad had a rule that he would always treat me as if I was 5 years older than I was. So at age 5 years old, he wanted me to start practicing sports, team sports, stuff like that. At 10 years old, he wanted me to start thinking about colleges. Okay. And then at 20 years old, I was ready to buy a house. So he told me I should start thinking about buying a house. Now he's pushing pretty hard for grandchildren. But so my mother did the same thing. She never spoke down to me. And I think that's what you were talking about a little bit with your kids being good in finances. You don't treat them like children. You treat them like adults who maybe have a little bit less knowledge. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they are kids. They have a lot of fun. And actually, I treat myself as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you and my father would get along. He likes to brag to his friends that he's more of a kid than I am, which I think honestly at this point is true. Interesting.
It's a point where you should say that your father is an engineer in a huge company and that
He was an engineer at Intel. He's retired now. But then he was also an entrepreneur, had his own company, but he's still a kid. I mean, if he listens to this, which hopefully he will, he'll be very proud to admit that he says, quote, "I'm more kid than you are," which is a play on words because it's grammatically incorrect. It's like a clever joke. But I think there's a lot of power in that because it allows children to look at their parents as someone else who's learning and someone else who's fun. And then they engage with you as an equal and not as someone that they're shy or afraid of or anything like that.
Well, you do need to teach boundaries and to teach respect. I mean, there is a limit to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So how do you strike that balance?
It's not easy. Anna does it.
Anna does the hard part, right?
Yeah.
You talk on the podcast and Anna does the hard part of striking the balance. So tell me a little bit about, I want to dive in a little bit just to our course because just so you guys know, we've had almost 12,000 downloads. It's the most popular episode we've ever had of the Becoming Superhuman podcast. But there were some questions that were left unresolved. One of those, which I hope I'm not going to fall asleep because I'm not a technical or mathematically inclined person. At least that's how I was convinced by a lot of educators. Unfortunately, I remember being pulled aside and told, "You're just not good at math." But a lot of students ask, how can you accelerate the learning process of technical materials, such as mathematics, such as scientific formulas, things like that?
Well, it has a lot to do with going from examples to rules. Rules are general and it's very hard to memorize rules. You kind of need to understand the rule to feel the rule, and it's like learning the cases in a foreign language.
Right.
But examples are not so general and they do not change very much. So you need to memorize a lot of examples and then you will understand the rule.
So if I'm looking at a medical textbook, I want to look at different cases and different ways that would play out.
This is a question that is always asked by medical students. They need to make differential diagnosis, and it's very hard, but they have a lot of use cases and they have very clear protocols. So they just follow the clear protocols for each use case until it becomes kind of natural for them. So if you take a doctor at 4 a.m., you will get a full protocol.
Interesting. Give me some examples. Say you have mathematical formulas where the examples might be very complicated, right? So I remember one of the biggest things I struggled with in high school was in Algebra 2, and I needed to memorize x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 2ac all over 2a, right? I even forget what the name for that equation is. I think it's the quadratic equation. But how could I have better learned that rather than I created a song for it? And to this day, I still have to sing the song.
Actually, there are like 5 or 6 different forms of writing it. So we just, at school, I had a very good math teacher. And that's why I became a mathematician. So one of the ways that he was teaching us was just taking this equation, putting in various numbers at various places, and understanding, decomposing how each number at each place changes the result. So you kind of start feeling what will happen if this number goes up or down. After you feel it, you can learn the rule.
And then the formula becomes natural, just like speaking in cases is natural.
Natural.
That's very interesting. And I love it just ties together so nicely with that. This is all kinds of learning, really. I mean, to touch back, that's why we speed read, because you can get more examples at once if you're speed reading an entire book with dozens of stories about the same idea.
It's very hard to find a good teacher, and it is probably even harder to know how to teach yourself. Usually people start teaching themselves after completing PhD degree, which not everybody can afford.
Yeah, I think I got lucky because I had ADD from an early age. And at some stage, I learned that I think it was actually about 12 or 13 years old. I realized that people were never going to stop asking me to learn things. So I better figure out how the hell to learn. And pretty much from age 13 to 18, I would come home every single day. I'd close my door, lock my door, and I would just teach myself whatever it was that the other students were able to pay attention and learn in the class, because I was not learning in the class at all.
I had very bad childhood experience of sensory deprivation. My parents always said to me, well, you should learn, you should learn, you should learn. And I was not exposed to anything actually. So I was so eager to experience new stuff that once I was old enough, I just couldn't stop experiencing new stuff.
What was one of the first major pivotal things that you taught yourself? I mean, I know you didn't actually study electrical engineering or computer science.
Actually, I did study electrical engineering, and computer science was something like on-the-job training. So
Right.
I just started to work. I came with some algorithms that I wrote in one language, and they said, okay, that was nice. Now you should do it in another language. So I just needed to adapt, and I kind of wrote it in another language. Then they looked at it, said, well, this works, but we cannot use it. These are the rules that you should follow. So I followed the rules.
So it was all autodidactic learning.
It was following the rules.
Interesting. The rules that you never actually studied, the rules that you learned by assembling examples and experience.
Yes, kind of.
Interesting. Let me ask another question, which is just my own personal interest, actually. This wasn't a requested question. What do you think, for both of you, each one, what do you think is the most impactful thing you've ever learned?
When to talk and when to shut up.
Okay, that's a pretty good one. Anna, what do you think?
How to enjoy the little experiences. I always were eager to learn to be the best. This is what my parents taught me as a rule in life. And then just to see the small things.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, I sometimes even push back the rules.
Yeah.
Because I want to enjoy it.
I think that's great. So presence, being in the moment, and appreciating.
Yeah.
I asked that question with a motivation, which is really to thank you guys, because I think the greatest thing I've ever learned is relearning how to learn. I don't think I could do anything that I do now if I hadn't learned from you guys how to learn and how to accelerate my learning. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
What else? Tell me about, you guys are working on a book, as I understand. Tell me about that.
Well, the book is almost finished, and we will see it very soon on Amazon.
Awesome. So as I understand it, the book is really, it's for the diehard fans. It's for the people who religiously read the blog. They want more than, I mean, because our course is slimmed down, let's say, to appeal to the mass audience. The book offers more content.
The book doesn't sell, it just helps. Many people have different needs, and they came to me, they came to Anna with different questions which cannot be addressed by a slim course.
Right.
So if you want to treat a specific problem that is not so common, but still occurs with like 5% of our students, you will find a recipe for it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it's the difference between the 20% and the 80%. Really.
Yeah, it's just like Pareto rule. But remember, there are many subjects in our course.
Right.
So someone will fail at something at some point. And
interesting.
This failure should not stop.
Yeah, I mean, when I was previewing the book, I realized it's not set up like a course. It's set up like a resource guide. It has much of the same information and probably more information, but not in a way that a beginner would want to read it. In the sense that it's there for people who are ready, like you said, to find the formulas that they need. Would you say that's correct?
You need to know what you're looking for if you are buying this book.
Interesting. And then what's next? I mean, we've talked about learning, super learning for kids. We've talked about the new book. We've talked about, well, actually, we haven't talked a little bit about improvements to the super learner course. which is, now we're almost 2 years on. In October, it'll be 2 years since we recorded the first course. And we've done improvements throughout the way, but I think it would not be keeping in line with what we preach if we didn't constantly improve the course. What are some things that stand out for you guys that we can do better?
Well, we can provide much more examples. This is something that we definitely can do.
Absolutely. I think the markers are such a huge thing that we teach in the course that especially there, it seems people just want more examples. They want to see, Lev, when I tell you a new piece of information, how do you create the marker? Or Anna, how do you create the marker? So maybe we could do a couple interesting examples completely on the fly, because I know we didn't have a chance to rehearse this, but completely on the fly, we could talk a little bit about how you might create markers for different things you learn.
Okay.
Cool. So, what have I learned recently? Well, today I learned actually why it is that you can't teach a child speed reading before the age of 13. Now, just to give a brief explanation, as I understood it, it's because until you've done a lot of reading, you don't recognize words just as words. You actually are still breaking them down into their sounds. But after many, many, many hours of reading, you look at the word incomprehensible, and even if it's misspelled in the middle of the word, your brain just, boom, gets it. Now, that's a pretty easy thing for me to remember because I'm very interested in speed reading and super learning. But how could someone set a marker for remembering that concept if maybe it was to-do list?
Look, you set the marker yourself. You said that there was a viral mail in which the letters were mixed and people still understood it. That was your example. So you actually created the marker.
You're right.
Very often we create the markers and we don't understand that we create them. This happens to all of us.
Is the thing that sticks out. If I just think about it, what the first thing come to my head? That would be a good marker.
And then spend a second. I think also people don't recognize that they've then created a marker, but they don't take a moment to pause and give detail. And because I've been trained by you guys, I actually, exactly like Lev said, I saw the word incomprehensible, and it just so happened that that viral mail had a black background and slightly grayish letters. And then it also said, how amazing your brain is, but brain was spelled Brian. And so I had very, very vivid detail. For me, it comes automatically. But for a lot of students, that vivid detail is something they need to practice and they don't do it.
I think details is a bit tricky because you add details from new information. Mm-hmm. So in this particular case, I would add details not from this particular mail that you read like 5-7 years ago, but from some other stuff that you learned about it. Mm-hmm. This way you compress the amount of markers you have. For example, when you read a paragraph, you have like one marker or two markers, and you need to put in like 11 pieces of information. How you do it? You add details.
So each detail becomes an element of a piece of information. So connect it for me. Let's say that the reason I was memorizing that piece of information, why can't you teach speed reading to 10-year-old children? Let's say if I was memorizing that because it's a to-do list, right? It's something I need to write a blog post about that and 3 other subjects.
Well, first of all, you put in the number of 13, which is like an age. So you should probably put in some kind of marker which is associated with 13, like black cat, which is the unlucky number, or like bar mitzvah crown if you had a bar mitzvah.
Or what about the word 13 with the numbers rearranged that way?
It will not work well because you cannot mix too much within a marker. It should be very fast. Mm-hmm. When you speed up your markers become very, very simple.
I see.
And don't forget all other details that you want to remember according that fact that you learn.
Okay, so what would those be?
You need to remember the breaking sounds and why is that and how is that and what should you do. So if you store the information in a form of question and answer around that marker, it will arrange all other details.
Okay. For example,
breaking the word, just take this incredible and break it into pieces, color each piece in a different color. For example.
Okay, I lost you there.
When you say break, you should apply it to your marker.
So break is it's a detail of the marker. Break as in breaking the sound.
Breaking the word incredible. You break the word incredible itself. You do not add words that were not in the original marker. You had the word incredible in the original marker, reuse it by changing it a bit.
Okay. Let's try another piece of knowledge. What's something one of you guys has learned recently? Yeah, it's always tough. It's like, what are you going to think about next? It's like meditation. Instantly your brain is clear, right?
Yeah, the problem is that I learned a lot of stuff, but I cannot put it inside this lecture. Like, I learned a lot of stuff in Spanish and Portuguese, but actually I'm not very good at these languages yet. I spent like 3 hours learning both of them, so it's not a lot of time. So I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about it.
Sure. Well, and also I think actually creating markers for new foreign languages is the easiest thing. It's creating markers for concepts that I really struggle with. If you give me a new word in any language, I can come with a marker in a fraction of a second.
Well, everybody has a problem with something different.
True.
From my book, you can read about the etymology method. Etymology method is the method that I teach about how to learn different concepts.
Okay.
It appears on my blog, but it doesn't appear in our main course.
Tell me about that.
You kind of search the word inside the dictionary. Once you found the word on Google, you can understand how the word was formed.
Okay.
And what it really means.
And this is for foreign language words?
No, also for English. I mean, when you have a concept which you don't understand, you kind of deconstruct the concept into its building blocks. And when you study the etymology of the word, how the word was constructed, it actually allows you to deconstruct it.
Okay, so let's give an example since that's been our feedback. Transcendentalism. It's a nice word because it uses some components that are used other places in the language.
Yeah. Trans is over. Ascent is like go up. So it starts with going up, over.
Okay.
Now there is this grammatic ending ental, which means a noun of how I go up, over. So
fair enough. I was going to look up the dictionary explanation so that we could connect it, but I actually don't even know how to spell transcendentalism. Nope, I'm going to have to Google it.
Google always works.
Yeah, Google always knows to correct.
I usually
It's also very good for markers. If you cannot create a marker, just go to Google image search and Google it.
Yeah.
I would ask you where this word is a part of something. So maybe you know the concept, maybe you understand it. But let's say if you saw it in a movie, or you read it in a book, or you heard it in a lecture, that would be the visual marker for it.
Mm-hmm. So always connecting to prior knowledge if it's there.
Yeah.
You could edit like a meaning, like who goes over up. It's a man that is meditating. So you have a meditating man and you have a pathway to the heaven, and the man is transcending this pathway. So you have both the meaning, the word itself, how it sounds, and you also have a use case how to use it. And you get it in one shot.
All in one go.
Yeah.
So for those who are dying to know what the definition of transcendentalism is, it's a system developed by Immanuel Kant based on the idea that in order to understand the nature of reality, one must first examine and analyze the reasoning process that governs the nature of experience. So going over in a macro level, kind of looking from a further away, and then transcendentalism, given the nature of experience.
You cannot learn from a very, very long explanation, so you always need to go to the simpler explanation.
Sure. And break it down a little bit. Let's give one more example, and then I know we have to wrap up because you guys have kids to raise to be super learners. Well, if we were going to try and remember some statistics or dates. Now, we talk in the course a little bit about creating symbols for each number. We also talk about the major method for memorizing numbers. But in actuality, if I read the date 1906 in a book, I'm not going to stop and encode that into actual major method. And I'm not going to think a pen and a fish and a bagel and a broken pair of glasses, which are my markers for 1906. So how would I do it?
Well, personally, when I see historical information, I connect it to some other historical information. There was a failed revolution in Russia in 1905, so I just take this markers that I have for that revolution, add one.
Add one.
Add one.
Nice. 1906 for me is there was a World's Fair or a failed World's Fair. And so I connect it that way. Anytime I hear anything about like 1970s, I think about specific musicians who might have been popular at the time or who might have died at the time. Yeah.
I think of drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's easier to learn if you have a lot of prior knowledge. Mm-hmm. And for children, in order to create prior knowledge is experience.
Yeah.
And as much as they experience on themselves, different habits, different places, different stories on ours, when I'm telling them a lot about my childhood and what I learned and who I am and who the grandparents are, they learn and they accumulate that experience.
We have a lot of culture-specific talks, like I'm explaining about samurai swords and Chinese
what words?
food.
Sorry?
Samurai swords, katana and the little ones.
Oh.
So when they talk about Japan, they kind of imagine samurai with a sword. And now when I talk about China, they imagine Chinese food.
Interesting.
So it's organizing them the cultural experience and the culinary experience and some other experiences in one run.
Based on our method, let me ask this general question. I usually tell people when I'm interviewed on podcasts that one of the most important things in the method is that everything you learn needs to become a highly detailed visual marker. You guys would agree with that, right? No?
No.
Why? Well, okay, hold on. It needs to become a highly detailed marker if that marker is sensory, smell, touch, something like that.
Well, first of all, if you really want to store it for long term, it's usually dual coding. So,
Sure.
So it's not only one sense, but several.
Okay. Agreed.
Now you have creative markers and you have logical markers. If you have some sort of rule to remember, you will not generate a creative marker for it. Creative markers are very good for specific examples.
Okay.
When you have logical rules, you kind of remember the logic.
And those are markers where there's interaction between different things, like X creates Y.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to continue with my original line of inquiry, which is the base of our method is that you need to create a powerful symbol, even if that's feeling or emotion or this, your marker for chocolate is the smell of chocolate. Your marker for childhood is brightly colored playgrounds. Everything you learn needs to have a marker. Let me ask this. Do you think children at a young age are capable of that, or when are they capable of that?
Children do create powerful experiences. These experiences are of different sorts, and it takes some time till this visual vocabulary becomes strong enough to build upon it.
Okay.
So I think that around the age of 13, the visual vocabulary is large enough and strong enough to build upon it. I'm not sure what happens before it because every child is different.
Right. So when you say visual vocabulary, you mean that they've seen enough things. It kind of sounds funny. They've seen some things, man. They've seen enough things and they have enough creativity built up to just randomly call up an image to associate with a memory.
It becomes easier when you watch TV and read books.
Interesting. It's funny. I think Lev is the only learning expert I've ever spoken to who encourages watching TV.
We discuss cartoons to the death.
Yeah?
Yeah.
With the kids?
Yeah.
Your kids are how old, remind me?
7 and 8 and 2.
And they're watching cartoons exclusively in Hebrew?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
So what languages?
The same languages that we do.
Okay, so they're also watching in Russian, also watching in English.
Yeah, of course.
And then we
Incredible.
always ask them, what do you think is happening? Why did the creator did that? And so we analyze it to the death.
Every opportunity is a learning opportunity, as you said earlier, Lev.
Yeah,
Let me ask
here.
this, at least here. let me ask you this. For me, I only spoke my second language, Hebrew, with my father, so I never got confused. Is there a risk of children? I mean, your children are growing up literally speaking 3 languages, not just 2. And it's not that mom speaks one and dad speaks the other. Is there any risk of children confusing languages if you expose them to a foreign language earlier?
Our children predominantly use Hebrew. Mm-hmm. We do not use that much of other languages. We kind of put these languages before them, but we do not require them to acquire these languages.
Okay.
So they do speak with our parents Russian. Mm-hmm. They speak with us predominantly Hebrew. And the English is something that we try to tune our TV to.
Okay. Do you think parents need to worry about their children becoming confused, or is that another one of those, take a lot of examples and the brain will figure out the rules, that if a word sounds like this, it's probably an English word?
I think there is speech rules that, for example, if you start a sentence, always finish it the same language. So there are rules that would help your child to become more accurate in each language.
Yeah.
And it's important.
Yeah.
It's important to keep context. If you started some conversation in some context, you should not change languages in between.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, it's such a super learner statement to be like, well, if you start a sentence or a conversation in one language, you have to finish it in the second. It's like there are so many people all over the world who are afraid to learn new languages when your kids are learning 3. More.
Well, they love to practice martial arts, and each martial art comes with a language.
Right.
So when my smallest child was 3 years old, he was counting in Korean.
You're kidding me.
No.
Because his instructor...
Taekwondo.
Yeah, that exactly. So that was...
Yeah.
So there are songs and sentences.
I used to work at Samsung at the time, so it was really fun.
You'd come into work and be like, I don't know how to say 3, but I have 3 tasks today we need to discuss. That's really cool. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you guys. And I'm really looking forward. I don't know about you guys, but the learning course for me is something that's very personally meaningful, just given how much I struggled to learn. And honestly, how many teachers I had who kind of didn't believe in me because I had different needs as a learner. So I'm very excited about that course. And I'm excited to improve our super learning course. Yeah. Any last thoughts you guys want to share?
Do not forget to learn new things.
Yeah.
Always learn new things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dr. Lev and Professor Anna, thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. By the way, before you get back to rocking your day and applying some of the new knowledge you've picked up in the last half hour or so, please do us a big favor and head over to iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you discovered this episode and leave us a review. Reviews are a really important aspect of making the show a success, and besides helping us create more great content for you, they really, really brighten our day. That's all for now. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.